When a quiet farmer finally found a place to call his own, he was searching for peace, not a secret. But one night, a strange noise beneath his bed led him to a hidden room, one that wasn't empty. Someone had been living there, watching, waiting, right under his feet. Who was hiding in his home, and what dark truth was buried with them? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. Caleb Turner, a quiet and weathered farmer in his late 60s, had spent most of his life working land that never truly belonged to him. After decades of moving from one rented field to another, he finally managed to buy a small, aging farmhouse tucked deep within the rolling plains of Oklahoma. The house stood alone, surrounded by endless stretches of dry grass and a silence so heavy it almost felt alive. From the outside, it looked harmless, just another forgotten property left behind by time. But the moment Caleb stepped inside, something felt off. The wooden floors creaked in ways that didn't match his footsteps, and the air carried a strange stillness, as if the house was holding on to something it refused to reveal. His days quickly fell into a steady routine, feeding livestock at sunrise, repairing fences under the scorching afternoon sun, and ending each night in the same narrow bedroom. Yet, despite the exhaustion that should have guaranteed deep sleep, Caleb often found himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening, because beneath the quiet, there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible presence, one that made the old farmhouse feel far from empty. That night, the wind howled across the open plains like a restless spirit, rattling the loose shutters of Caleb Turner's farmhouse. The sound wasn't unusual. Storms often rolled through Oklahoma with a kind of quiet violence, but something about this night felt different. The air was heavier, thicker, as if the darkness itself had weight. Caleb lay in bed, staring into the shadows above him, his body exhausted but his mind unwilling to rest. He had spent the entire day repairing a broken fence line, his hands raw and aching, his back screaming for relief. Normally, sleep would have taken him the moment his head touched the pillow, but not tonight. Tonight, there was a sound. At first, it was so faint he thought he imagined it a soft scraping noise, irregular, almost cautious. Caleb held his breath, listening. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Then it came again. Scrape, pause, scrape. His eyes narrowed. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the walls. It was coming from beneath him. Caleb slowly pushed himself up, the old mattress groaning under his weight. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and sat still, listening harder now, every nerve in his body on edge. Scrape! This time, there was no doubt. Something was moving under the floor. A cold chill crept up his spine. His first instinct was to dismiss it. Maybe an animal had gotten under the house. A raccoon? Maybe. Or a stray dog looking for shelter. That would make sense. It had to make sense. But deep down, something didn't sit right. The movement was too deliberate, too careful, too human. Caleb reached for the oil lamp on his bedside table, his fingers tightening slightly as he lit it. The small flame flickered to life, casting long, trembling shadows across the room. The walls seemed to shift with the light, bending and stretching like something alive. He stood up slowly. The sound stopped. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence. Too much silence. Caleb took a cautious step forward, the wooden floor creaking beneath his boots. Then another. His gaze fixed on the center of the room, right beneath where his bed had been. And that's when he noticed it. A slight gap. So subtle it could have been missed entirely. One of the floorboards didn't sit flush with the others. Its edges were worn differently, as if it had been lifted more than once. Caleb's breath slowed. He crouched down, bringing the lamp closer. The warm glow revealed faint scratch marks along the sides of the plank marks that hadn't been there earlier. Or maybe they had, and he just hadn't noticed. His heart began to pound. "Just an animal," he muttered under his breath, though the words sounded hollow even to him. Still, he reached out. His fingers brushed against the edge of the board. And then, it moved. Not much, just enough to confirm what he feared. It wasn't nailed down. Caleb pulled his hand back instinctively, a sharp breath escaping his lips. For a long second, he just stared at it, his mind racing, trying to piece together what he was seeing. Why would there be a loose board under his bed? Who would build something like that? And more importantly, who or what was using it? The silence returned. But now it felt different, not empty, but watchful, as if something below knew he had discovered it. Caleb swallowed hard, forcing himself to move, slowly, carefully. He slid his fingers under the edge again. This time, he didn't hesitate. With a firm grip, he lifted. The board came up with a low, dragging creak, revealing darkness beneath thick, absolute darkness that swallowed the light from his lamp. A hollow space. Not just a crawl space, a room. The air that rose from below was cold and damp, carrying a faint scent of earth and something else. Something stale, lived in. Caleb leaned closer, raising the lamp. The light pushed into the darkness, but only barely, illuminating the top of what looked like a narrow wooden ladder leading down. His chest tightened. This wasn't part of the original house. Someone had built this, hidden it, used it, and judging by the sounds he had heard, it wasn't empty. A sudden noise echoed from below. A shift, a breath. Caleb froze. Every instinct screamed at him to step back, to cover the opening, to pretend he had never seen it. But another part of him, stronger, deeper, refused to let him turn away. Because whatever was down there had been right beneath him the entire time. And now it knew he was there too. Caleb didn't realize he had stopped breathing until his chest began to ache. The faint sound from below, the unmistakable shift of movement, froze him in place. His hand trembled slightly as he raised the lamp higher, forcing the weak glow deeper into the darkness beneath his bedroom floor. "Hello," he called out, his voice rough, uncertain. No answer. Only silence, thick and suffocating. But it wasn't empty. He knew that now. Swallowing hard. Caleb swung one leg over the edge of the opening and found the first rung of the ladder with his boot. The wood creaked under his weight, old but sturdy enough. Every instinct warned him to stop, to close the board and walk away, but curiosity, sharp and relentless, pulled him downward. Step by step, he descended. The air grew colder, damp, and then his boots touched the ground. The space beneath the floor opened into a small, hidden room far larger than he expected. The walls were reinforced with rough wooden planks, hastily constructed but purposeful. The ceiling was low, forcing him to hunch slightly. And the smell. It wasn't decay. It was human. Caleb slowly lifted the lamp, and what he saw made his heart slam violently against his ribs. This wasn't an abandoned hiding place. It was being lived in. A thin mattress lay against the far wall, covered with a worn blanket that looked recently used. A small table stood nearby, cluttered with items that didn't belong in a forgotten crawlspace, half-empty cans of food, a bottle of water, even a small flashlight. Fresh. Too fresh. Caleb took a slow step forward, his boots crunching softly against the dirt floor. His eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. And then he noticed it. The blanket shifted, just slightly. His breath caught. "Who's there?" he demanded. Louder this time, though fear tightened his throat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a figure moved. The blanket slid back just enough to reveal a pair of wide, terrified eyes staring directly at him. Caleb staggered back, nearly dropping the lamp. It was a girl. Young, pale, and very much alive. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall like a trapped animal, her breathing quick and uneven. Her clothes were worn, oversized, as if they hadn't been chosen for comfort but for whatever was available. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't call anyone." Caleb's mind spun. This wasn't possible. How long had she been down here? How had she gotten in? Why hadn't he noticed anything before? "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said quickly, raising one hand in a gesture of surrender. His voice softened, despite the storm of questions raging inside him. "I didn't even know you were here." The girl didn't respond. She just stared at him, searching his face as if trying to decide whether he was a threat or something worse. Caleb forced himself to stay still. Slow. Calm. His eyes drifted around the room again, taking in details he hadn't noticed at first. A small pile of food wrappers, recent. A jug of water half full. A backpack tucked into the corner. This wasn't a one-night intrusion. She had been living here, right beneath him. For days, maybe longer. "You've been here the whole time?" Caleb asked quietly, disbelief creeping into his voice. The girl hesitated, then, slowly, she nodded. A chill ran through him. All those nights he couldn't sleep, all those strange feelings in the house. He hadn't been alone, not even for a second. Why, he asked, why here? Her eyes dropped to the ground, her fingers clutching the edge of the blanket tightly. For a moment, Caleb thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible, "They're looking for me." The words hung in the air like a shadow. Caleb frowned. "Who is—" She shook her head quickly, panic flashing across her face. I can't say. "If they find me." Her voice broke. Caleb felt something shift inside him. Fear was still there, sharp and present, but it was no longer the strongest emotion. Now it was something else. Concern. Protectiveness. This wasn't just some stranger hiding under his floor. This was someone terrified, someone desperate. And somehow, she had chosen his home. Caleb took a slow breath, steadying himself. "All right," he said gently. "You don't have to tell me anything right now." The girl looked up at him, surprised. "But you can't stay down here like this," he continued. "It's not safe." Her expression tightened again, fear creeping back in. "It's safer than out there," she whispered. Caleb glanced toward the ladder leading up to his bedroom, the world above suddenly feeling very different than it had just minutes ago. Because whatever she was running from, it wasn't just her secret anymore. It had just become his. And deep down, Caleb knew. This discovery wasn't the end of the mystery. It was only the beginning. Caleb didn't climb back up right away. Instead, he stood there in that cramped, hidden room, the flickering light of his lamp casting uneasy shadows across the walls. The girl's words echoed in his mind. "They're looking for me." Who were they? And why did it sound like she truly believed her life depended on staying hidden? He had lived long enough to recognize fear when he saw it. This wasn't the kind of fear someone faked. It wasn't dramatic or loud, it was quiet, buried deep in her eyes, in the way her body stayed tense even when he spoke gently. Caleb slowly crouched down, lowering himself to her level, careful not to make any sudden movements. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The girl hesitated, her fingers tightening around the blanket. For a moment, It seemed like she might refuse. Then, barely above a whisper, "Lily." Caleb nodded, absorbing that. "All right, Lily." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "You've been hiding under my floor," he said. "Not accusing, just stating the truth, eating whatever you could find, staying quiet so no one would notice." Her eyes flickered with guilt, then fear again. "I didn't mean to. I know." Caleb interrupted gently. "You weren't trying to hurt anything." That seemed to catch her off guard. For the first time since he'd seen her, the panic in her face softened just slightly. Caleb leaned back a little, giving her space. His mind, however, was racing. Everything he thought he understood about his life about this house had just been turned upside down. For weeks, he had believed the strange noises, the uneasy feeling in the walls, the restless nights, were just part of adjusting to a new place. But it wasn't the house. It had been her, a living, breathing person, surviving in silence just feet beneath where he slept. And somehow, that realization didn't make him feel angry. It made him feel ashamed. Ashamed that he had been above her every night, unaware while she lived in fear below. Ashamed that the world had driven someone to hide like this in the first place. Caleb exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "Lily," he said. His voice quieter now, heavier with something deeper than curiosity. "How long have you been here?" She looked down, avoiding his gaze. "I don't know exactly," she admitted. "A few weeks, maybe more." "Weeks." Caleb felt that word settle heavily in his chest. "You've been under my house for weeks," he murmured. She nodded faintly. "And you never came out." "I couldn't." The answer was immediate, firm. Caleb studied her more closely now, not as a stranger, but as someone trying to understand. Her clothes were worn, her face pale from lack of sunlight, her eyes constantly shifting as if expecting danger at any second. This wasn't just hiding. This was survival. "Did someone hurt you?" he asked carefully. Lily froze. For a split second, something dark passed across her face, something broken. Then she shook her head quickly. Too quickly. Caleb didn't push. He didn't need to. He had seen enough in his life to know when silence said more than words ever could. The air between them grew still again. But this time it wasn't suffocating. It was fragile, like something was changing inside him. Caleb slowly stood up, glancing toward the ladder that led back to his bedroom. The world above suddenly felt distant, almost irrelevant compared to what was happening down here. For the first time in years, his life wasn't just about crops, fences, and routine. It was about a choice. A real one. He could close the board, call the authorities, and walk away from all of this. That would be the logical thing to do, the safe thing. Or he could listen. He could protect her. He could step into something uncertain, something complicated, something that might change everything. Caleb looked back at Lily. She was watching him now, her eyes filled with quiet desperation, not begging, but hoping. And in that moment, something inside him settled. A decision. "I'm not going to turn you in," he said. The words hung in the air. Lily's eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her face. "You're not?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "No." Silence followed, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was relieving. Lily's shoulders dropped slightly, as if she had been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. "But listen to me," Caleb continued, his tone firm but kind. "You can't stay down here like this. It's not right. It's not safe." She hesitated. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Caleb nodded. He had expected that answer. "Then we'll figure something out," he said. That word we changed everything. Lily blinked, as if she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. Caleb offered a small, tired smile. "You're not alone anymore," he added. For the first time, her expression truly shifted. Not fear, not suspicion, but something warmer, something fragile. Hope. And as Caleb stood there, in that hidden room beneath his own home, he realized something profound. He hadn't just discovered a secret under his bed. He had discovered a responsibility. And from this moment on, there was no going back to the life he had before. The morning after their first real conversation, Caleb didn't pretend anymore. He didn't act like Lily was a problem to solve or a situation to escape. Instead, he made coffee for two. It was a small gesture, but when he carefully helped her climb out from beneath the floor for the first time, the way she hesitated at the edge of the opening told him everything. She wasn't just afraid of the world. She was afraid of being seen. Caleb stepped back, giving her space as she slowly pulled herself into the dim light of the bedroom. Her eyes darted around, taking in every detail like it was unfamiliar territory. "When was the last time you were upstairs?" he asked gently. She didn't answer right away. "I don't remember," she finally whispered. That hit harder than he expected. Caleb led her to the kitchen, where sunlight filtered weakly through dusty windows. She flinched at the brightness, raising a hand instinctively to shield her eyes. Weeks underground had turned the outside world into something foreign. As she sat at the table, wrapping both hands around the warm mug, Caleb studied her more closely than before, not with suspicion, but with concern. "You said people are looking for you," he began carefully. "Why?" Lily stared into the coffee, her reflection trembling on the surface. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, "They never stopped," she murmured. Caleb frowned. "Who didn't?" She looked up at him, and this time, there was no hesitation. "The ones who owned this house before you." A cold silence filled the room. Caleb felt something shift deep inside his chest. "What are you talking about?" Lily swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I used to live near here," she said slowly. "Years ago, I was younger." Her voice wavered slightly, but she forced herself to continue. "One night, I was walking home. A truck stopped. They told me they needed help. Said something was wrong with their car." Caleb's jaw tightened. I believed them. The words fell like stones. "They brought me here." She continued, her voice barely steady now. "To this house." Caleb's mind raced. The same house, the same walls, the same floor beneath his bed. "They kept me here," she said. "Not just me, others too." But they didn't last. A chill crawled up Caleb's spine. "What do you mean they didn't last?" Lily's eyes filled with something dark, something heavy with memory. "They disappeared," she whispered. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too quiet. Caleb leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. This doesn't make sense," he muttered. If that happened, people would know. There would be reports, searches. "There were," Lily said quickly. "I was one of them." Caleb froze. "What?" She nodded slowly. "I heard them talking once." She said, "They said my name was on the news, that people were looking for me." Caleb stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Wait, what's your full name?" She hesitated. Then, "Lily Harper." The name hit him like a bolt of lightning. He had heard that name before, years ago. A missing girl. It had been all over the local news flyers in town. Whispers at the diner, people shaking their heads and saying how tragic it was. But that had been 10 years ago, Caleb said under his breath, his voice barely audible. Lily didn't respond. She didn't have to. Caleb stared at her, his heart pounding. "That's not possible," he said, though the conviction in his voice was gone. You don't look. I was kept hidden, she said quietly. For a long time. The word sent a wave of anger through him. Slow. Burning. Unstoppable. All those years, Caleb whispered. She nodded. I escaped, she added. Not long ago, I didn't know where else to go. So I came back here. Caleb blinked. Back here? Why would you come back to this place? Because I knew it, she said simply. I knew the hidden space. I knew how to survive here, without being seen. The realization settled heavily between them. This house was never just a house. It had been a prison, a secret buried in plain sight. And now Caleb owned it, his hands clenched into fists. The quiet life he thought he had built was standing on top of something far darker than he could have imagined. But beneath the shock, beneath the anger, something else began to rise. Clarity. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was truth waiting to be exposed. And Lily was the key to all of it? Caleb took a slow breath, steadying himself. We're not hiding anymore, he said firmly. Lily's eyes widened in fear. No, if they find me. They won't, Caleb cut in, his voice stronger now. Not this time. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. Because this time, you're not alone. Outside, the wind began to pick up again, rattling the windows like a warning. But inside that small farmhouse, something had changed. The fear was still there. The danger was real. But for the first time, they had a chance to uncover the truth, a chance to fight back, and a chance to finally end the secret that had been buried beneath that house for far too long. The days that followed changed Caleb Turner in ways he never expected. For years, his life had been simple, predictable, quiet, safe. He woke with the sun, worked until his body gave out, and slept without questioning anything beyond the boundaries of his land. But now nothing felt the same, because beneath that quiet life had been a truth so dark, it shattered everything he thought he understood about the world, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. Caleb stood at the edge of his property one morning, staring down the long dirt road that led into town. His jaw was tight, his mind restless. We can't keep hiding, he said finally. Behind him, Lily stood on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself. She had begun to adjust slowly, stepping into the light, eating real meals, speaking more, but fear still lingered in every movement. They'll come back, she said softly. If they think I'm still alive, they'll come back. Caleb turned to face her. Then let them, he said. The word surprised even him. He wasn't the kind of man who looked for trouble, but something had shifted deep inside him, something solid, unmovable. He wasn't just protecting land anymore. He was protecting a person, and that changed everything. We're not going to run, Caleb continued. We're going to do this the right way. Lily shook her head. Panic rising. You don't understand. These people, they don't just disappear. They have connections. They know how to cover things up. Maybe, Caleb said, but they're not untouchable. He stepped closer, his voice steady. And neither are we helpless. Silence stretched between them. For a long moment, Lily just looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to understand where this strength was coming from. Caleb had spent most of his life being overlooked, ignored, treated like a man who simply worked and kept his head down. But now, he was done being invisible. That afternoon, Caleb did something he hadn't done in years. He drove into town not for supplies, not for work, but for answers. The small sheriff's office sat at the edge of Main Street, exactly as it always had. Same faded sign, same quiet parking lot. But as Caleb stepped out of his truck, everything felt heavier. This wasn't just a visit. This was a line he couldn't uncross. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and coffee. Behind the desk sat a man Caleb recognized, Sheriff Daniel Brooks. Older now, slower, but still sharp-eyed. Caleb the sheriff said, "Surprised. Didn't expect to see you here." Caleb nodded once. "I need to talk to you." Something in his tone must have registered, because the sheriff's expression changed immediately. "All right," he said. "Standing. Let's step into my office." The door closed behind them with a quiet click. Caleb didn't sit. There was a girl who went missing. He said, "Years ago. Lily Harper." The sheriff froze. For just a second, but it was enough. "I remember," Brooks said slowly. "Whole town does. She's alive." The words hit like a shockwave. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You better not be joking about something like that." "I'm not," Caleb replied firmly. Silence filled the room. Brooks leaned back, studying him carefully. "If that's true, then where has she been all this time?" Caleb hesitated. This was the moment. The point where everything would change. Then he said it. "In my house." The air went still. "What?" "There's a hidden room under the floor." Caleb continued. "She's been hiding there. She escaped from whoever took her." The sheriff stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Caleb, you realize what you're saying?" "I do." "And you're sure?" Caleb met his gaze. "I've seen her." A long pause followed. Then the sheriff grabbed his hat. "All right," he said. "We're going out there." An hour later, the sound of tires crunching gravel broke the silence of Caleb's farm. Lily stood frozen on the porch as the sheriff's car pulled up. Fear flooded her face instantly. "No," she whispered. "You said—" "I said you're not alone," Caleb interrupted gently. He stepped beside her. "And I meant it." The car door opened. Sheriff Brooks stepped out, his eyes scanning the property, sharp and alert. Everything felt like it was holding its breath. Caleb glanced at Lily. "This is how we end it," he said quietly. Her hands trembled, but she didn't run. For the first time, she stood her ground. And as the sheriff approached, the truth that had been buried for years was finally about to surface. In that moment, Caleb realized something powerful. He wasn't just a farmer anymore. He wasn't just a man who worked land and lived quietly. He had become something more, a protector, a witness, and the man who refused to let the past stay buried. The moment Lily stepped forward, everything seemed to slow down. Sheriff Brooks stopped a few feet away, his eyes fixed on her face, searching, analyzing, trying to match memory with reality. For years, her face had been nothing more than a faded photograph on missing posters, a name whispered in quiet conversations. A story people had slowly stopped telling. And now, she was standing right in front of him, alive. "My God!" the sheriff muttered under his breath. Lily's hands trembled at her sides, but she didn't move back. Caleb stood just behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence steady. Grounding. "It's really you, isn't it?" Brooks asked softly. Lily nodded. That was all it took. The years of doubt, of unanswered questions, of cold cases gathering dust, they all came crashing back at once. The sheriff turned to Caleb, his voice sharper now. "We need to document everything, right now." Within hours, the quiet farmhouse transformed into something else entirely. Police vehicles lined the dirt road. Investigators moved in and out of the house, their voices low but urgent. Cameras flashed, evidence bags filled. The hidden room beneath the floor was exposed no longer a secret buried in darkness, but a crime scene laid bare under harsh light. Caleb stood off to the side, watching it all unfold. This place, which had once been his dream of peace and solitude, had become the center of something far bigger than himself. But strangely, he didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt certain, because this was the truth, and it needed to be seen. Lily sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch, a paramedic gently checking her vitals. She looked fragile, like someone who had been holding herself together for far too long. But there was something else in her eyes now. Relief. For the first time, she wasn't hiding. She wasn't running. She was finally being seen. As the investigation unfolded, the truth came out piece by piece, dark, disturbing, undeniable. The previous owners of the house weren't just reclusive. They had been running something far worse. A hidden operation. People taken, held, forgotten. The farmhouse had never been just a home. It had been a mask. And beneath it, a prison. Authorities uncovered evidence linking multiple disappearances over the years, cases that had gone cold, stories that had been dismissed, families that had been left without answers. Until now. By evening, the sky burned orange as the sun dipped low across the fields. The chaos had quieted, replaced by a heavy stillness. Caleb stood near the fence, looking out over the land that had changed his life. He heard footsteps behind him. Lily. She walked slowly, still wrapped in the blanket, but steadier now. Stronger, they said. She began, her voice soft. They said they're going to help me, that I can start over. Caleb nodded. You deserve that, he said. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. You saved me, she whispered. Caleb shook his head gently. No, he replied. You survived. I just listened. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but this time they didn't fall from fear. They came from something else. Freedom. They stood there in silence for a moment, watching the last light fade over the horizon. The farmhouse behind them was no longer just a structure. It was a place where truth had finally been uncovered, where silence had been broken, where a life had been given back. Weeks later, the story spread far beyond the small town. News outlets picked it up. Investigations reopened. Families came forward, hoping some for the first time in years that answers might finally come. And at the center of it all was a farmer who had simply refused to ignore what was right beneath him. Caleb's life never returned to what it had been before. But he didn't want it to, because the quiet life he once longed for had been built on ignorance. And now, he understood something deeper. Sometimes, the most important things aren't found out in the open. They're hidden, buried, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. On a quiet evening, standing alone on his land, Caleb looked toward the house one last time. Not with fear, not with regret, but with clarity. Because what he had discovered beneath his bed hadn't just changed someone else's life, it had changed his too. And in the end, that was the real miracle. Caleb Turner never expected that the quiet life he fought so hard to build would be the very thing that tested his courage the most. What started as a simple desire to own a piece of land and live in peace turned into a moment that demanded something far greater than comfort. The truth is, life rarely changes with loud warnings. Sometimes, it whispers, a strange noise in the night, a feeling that something isn't right. And in those moments, most people choose to ignore it to stay safe, to look away. But Caleb didn't. He listened. He faced the unknown. And because of that, he uncovered a truth that others had buried for years. This story reminds us that courage isn't about strength or fearlessness. It's about choice. The choice to step forward when it's easier to step back. The choice to care when it's safer not to. Because sometimes, the smallest decision to look closer, to ask questions can change not just your life, but someone else's forever.